Welcome to Core Concepts. This program is sponsored by the Institute of Applied Metaphysics and Church of Revelation. And today we're coming from the Buntyn Church, which is on Prescott, just west of Highland and the University of Memphis. And my guest is Dr. Mark Matheney. And Dr. Matheney is a minister. He's 42 years in the ministry.
Oh, thank you. I thought you were going to say 42 years old.
Yeah. He's with the United Methodist Church. He's going to tell us a little bit about this particular church building here, Buntyn Church, because of the activities. This is where he has his office. And so we're going to be talking about that, a little bit about his ministry. As you know, in this program, we ask people to tell us what they believe, why they believe it, and what they're doing about it. In other words, how did they come to the belief system that they hold, and how's it manifesting in their lives? And what has manifested besides the ministry in Dr. Matheney's life is a number of organizations, some of them that are based here. We're going to be talking about some of these organizations. Welcome to the Core Concepts.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you.
Just a moment, just a few things about this. This Buntyn Church is a Presbyterian church.
Buntyn Presbyterian Church.
And it's providing kind of a center for a lot of outreach programs.
That's right. One of their main things is they have a preschool here. It's one of the top quality preschools in the city. But then they love to host different groups that help the community. So they have two other churches that meet here at different times. And then the Office of HARC, the group that I work with, Highland Area Renewal Corporation, is here. And also Independent Transportation Network Memphis, at.PM we call it.
Now HARC is, even though it's has urban renewal written on it, it doesn't mean building new buildings, does it?
The renewal part is more in the sense of renewing the life. Our basic mission is the quality of life in the neighborhoods touching Highland Street in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a really very interesting and vital part of our city. And you know, a lot of Memphis is east-west. You think of Poplar and Union and go into Germantown and the river and all.
All east-west.
But it's important to do some vertical, some north-south. And so extreme diversity of neighborhoods touching Highland Street, all the way from about Treadwell High to the north down to about the interstate to the south and in between.
Yeah, Highland runs a lot further than people realize, because it breaks up, and then we have it over on James Road, crossing James Road, where I live,
way down there
in Raleigh.
And as you know, when you get below Park, Highland continues as a small street for a while, but South Prescott kind of picks up with a curve, a famous curve. And so we really kind of take the curve there, and it goes on down toward where Interstate and Lamar meet.
So what is the mission of HARC?
The quality of life in those neighborhoods, as manifest in very specific kinds of programs. Some of those that are highest on our list right now, urban vegetable gardening. We have copied the university with one of their concrete block gardens that they have on the east side of campus, and some of the great Memphis groups like Grow Memphis and others. And so right now we're sponsoring about 15 large and small vegetable gardens sprinkled through the community.
So that encourages people to set up a gardening in their backyard.
Grow some of their own food, and most of it we give to the food pantry, which is one of the large MIFA sponsored food pantries over at St. Luke's United Methodist on Island.
Now, for the benefit of the people that are not in Memphis, give the proximity, kind of give an idea of where we're located, where we are right now, where that whole area is you're talking about. Highland is probably the main thoroughfare, that and Central, that go through the University of Memphis, or near the university.
That's right. Central runs on the north edge of the main campus, runs east-west, and then Highland runs north-south, and the campus technically does not touch Highland, but the neighborhood just west of the main campus includes St. Luke's United Methodist Church that I mentioned, several of the fraternity houses, and
lots of fraternity houses,
religious organizations connected to the university. And hot news, Jim, the latest thing is the former branch library, which is at the corner of Midland and Highland, is going to become a community meeting place and the welcome center for the university.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's coming the next few months.
Yeah. And I noticed that some of the popular restaurants, like the one near the Rhodes College, is now over here on next to this campus as well.
Is it fair to mention Cafe Eclectic?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Cafe Eclectic has a second location now at the corner of Minders in Highland, in the building that's called the Stratum, an apartment building.
And
Channel 13 is a big
that's a big
watch point.
Yeah, Channel 13. And as is Hart doing anything besides, that's the main thing now, the gardening, or is there something else?
No, that's
going
one
on?
of 3 or 4 main things.
What else?
The next thing is that we were sort of the birth mother of IT in Memphis. Now that's really a dream that Pat Hickman, who serves as our president of the board of Hart, and who is a member, very dedicated member here at Buntyn, she was hoping for a long time that we have better transportation for the senior citizens in Memphis. It's a big need. And so she discovered a group that's called IT in Memphis, and a fellow named Fred Wimmer got excited about it and helped get it started about a little over 2 years ago. And now we're finally on the verge of actually offering safe, volunteer-driven transportation for seniors and visually impaired persons. Big need in Memphis. There's a shocking amount of lateness or missing of doctor appointments, for instance, among seniors for lack of transportation. The bus system is valiant, but is very inadequate for the total needs of our city. If people don't have their own vehicle, they're in a pickle. It's really, really hard in Memphis. This will at least address those that are elderly, and sort of the beginning of it was in Portland, Maine, and that's where the national headquarters is. And our affiliate is about the 18th or 19th nationwide. Other cities like Cincinnati, Kansas City, etc. But it really started to help answer that question that we, when you get to be about your age or my age, and our parents are aged, we face that terrible time when we have to take their car keys. They can no longer drive. Whether they volunteer that or you even have to really talk them into it. Recently, my mother...
It's the last vestige of freedom, isn't it? They don't want to
my
give
mother,
that up.
who's 91 down in Meridian, she just recently gave my younger brother her car. She said, I'm really not going to drive anymore, just take my keys, son. But it doesn't usually happen that easily. It's tough. But some of the statistics that are very sad as far as traffic accidents have to do with elderly drivers who really probably should not be on the road anymore. The only group larger in terms of number of accidents is 15 and 16-year-olds.
My grandfather lived to be 99, and he had an old boat, one of those old Chrysler Newport type things.
A tank.
And there was no way that he would allow that to be gotten rid of. So my father had to build a shed to keep that thing in so he could see it. And it was at least 5 or 6 years of his last part of his life, and that car sat in the shed where he could see it.
Another big part of the need is that in Shelby County, 1/3 of our senior citizens live in poverty. And then of that group, 12% never make it to the doctor. And a large part of the reason is lack of adequate transportation.
So does it include school? What all does it include besides?
You mean where could you go with such a ride?
Yeah, that Hart provide, or ITN provide.
ITN will be providing rides at the place requested by the person. And let me tell you the way it's handled. It's a very good system that has proven out strongly in other cities, and we think we can adapt it and work it here in Memphis. But what happens is there's a membership. So a senior citizen either joins as a member or a family member enrolls them. It's a basic annual membership fee of just $45. And then you place an account of, say, $100, and then the costs of the rides are simply deducted from that. You don't have money changing hands between the driver and the rider. But you just deduct it and then build it back up. And then the average ride is less than half of what a typical taxi cab might cost. And it's eventually going to be 24/7, like at any time.
Well, that's something else. So Hart, the ITN is one of its main things, the gardening, and what else is Hart doing?
The next thing that we have really strongly gotten to just in the last few months, we have an alliance partnership with a group that's called STAY. STAY. That stands for Support the Authentic You, and they are a program of Resources for Human Development, RHD. RHD is in several cities around the country. The main person we work with is named Steve Evans, and he's in charge of 14 states, mostly the eastern states. And then the local worker who works with him is named Liz Ray. She's a wonderful young lady, lives right across the street here on Prescott Street. But she coordinates, she has a degree in social work from UT, and she coordinates a program for approximately 32 formerly homeless people. And what RHD does is they simply provide a roof over the heads for these folks. It's a low-cost rental apartment. But they came to us and said, gee, can you help us come up with some activities and some things that will enhance the quality of life for these folks? And so we brainstormed together with them and with several of the folks who are actual residents, and we came up with a special partnership involving Prescott Memorial Baptist Church, which is located down on Getwell, across from the south campus of the University of Memphis, just below Park Avenue. It's a church that used to be Ascension Lutheran. There's a big tower next door called Ascension Tower for seniors, but then Prescott Baptist has continued for many years. Now they are making a creative merger with Shady Grove Presbyterian Church, so it's going to be a merger from those two denominations. And so I tell people, well, it's fun as a Methodist to work with those Baptists and Presbyterians for the sake of all those other branches who are part of this group. But we had the very first session of the program, and we call it the Friendship Center. And it just means that the church opens its doors a couple of times a week, in our case Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And the volunteers come, and we have a good lunch and happy activities for these 31 formerly homeless people. And we're going to set up some job training, some literacy training, field trips like going to Redbirds and Grizzlies ball games. The other day we began with simply a Thanksgiving meal, and we had roast turkey and ham and all that stuff, and had a lot of time and fun. Just
a lot of possibilities there. That you,
right.
Do you have anything that you'd like to see Hart do that not yet being done, but that you'd like to see that happen?
Well, yes, and if I might continue on the theme of housing, you know, that's one type of program there with people who are in stable sponsored housing. But we're interested in the neighborhoods, and especially a really wonderful neighborhood that's part of the network in the Hart area is Buntyn. And it's defined by Southern on the north, about, I think most people say Sims on the east, or on the west actually, Highland on the east, and about to Park Avenue on the south. It's where the famous Mystic High School was for so many years before it closed years ago. And it's an area where there are many fine homes, and there are also many homes that could be fine if they were renovated. And there are many homes that have various dilapidation and code violations, or you know, need some help, need some attention. So what we'd like to do is to work with that neighborhood in upgrading the housing. And we've just recently had a little bit of success in talking the University Neighborhood Development Corporation, another one of our partner type groups. They're going to fund a contractor who would become the one who will supervise volunteers to come and help a given senior citizen or family fix up their house. And so we're very much interested in that we have one particular house where we're trying to work with the owner first to get out, or to work out a way of getting past the taxes, back taxes that are owed to the property, and then get it fixed up, and then have it to where it will be a productive part of the neighborhood.
So you have cooperation from the university's corporation. What about from the city?
And both city and county, we've talked to some of the officials, and they're very pro. Now, they don't always have resources or very much the speed sometimes to do various things, but just to give you an example, the other day I met David Lenore, who is the county trustee, and of course he undeniably expresses to people his main interest is in the collecting of the property taxes, but they're interested in creative programs that will help get properties back onto the tax rolls and be a positive contribution to the community. And he talks as if he's willing to show some flexibility in working on that. For instance, the house that I mentioned to you, talking to the owner and working out a payment plan so that there can be a reasonable catching up on those taxes instead of just another foreclosure and a shuttering of the house that sits there vacant. So we're trying to get to the so-called nitty-gritty. Now here's another important partner, and of course this is not the only partner of this type, but Habitat for Humanity, with which I was involved way back in 1983 when we began the first chapter.
Well, they basically built new houses, didn't they?
For a long time, but just recently they have shifted to where they will build new houses, but they also will now do renovation. So we're hoping to involve them to get into the mix and to come and to help build houses. So the idea will be that, for instance, this owner that I've mentioned, first we work out a plan to get his house operational, to meet all the codes, to become occupied. It's a duplex. Once it's occupied, the steady rental there would be enough to help him pay off the taxes. But the critical thing of getting it occupiable would happen through volunteers and through groups like Habitat for Humanity, Neighborhood Housing Opportunities, United Housing Inc., several groups like that. Just like we have a lot of church youth groups who'll go to Appalachia each year and they'll work on some things. We want to do some local, some Memphis service projects like that. SOS is another famous group for that over on Poplar in the Binghamton area. But we're hoping that maybe some people who actually see this program today will call and say, yeah, I'd like to help fix up a house, or I know how to do painting and I've done a little bit of insulation and roofing with a Habitat house, so how can I get involved with your project? We'd love to hear that.
What have they done? I know that you've got an old Masonic lodge that's been turned into a community center in Binghamton.
Yeah, that's a great place. Have you eaten there yet?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's called Caritas Village.
Oni is...
Oni Johns.
Oni Johns.
Have you interviewed her yet for one of these?
No, I have not interviewed her. Well, we've talked.
You should have her on your list.
But we will. And the Methodist church there that was turned over to another organization that is very proactive in community service.
It's 258 North Merton, and it used to be Everett Memorial Methodist Church. It's still a church, and they call it Binghamton Methodist. But the main usage of the building is by a group called Center for Transforming Communities, led by a dynamic lady named Amy Moritz.
Amy Moritz, yeah. I've asked her to be on the show, but she's not as yet
I'll help you lobby her.
You just twist her arm for us and we'll...
I'll try something a little more gentle than that, but yeah.
Tell me, has that pretty much run the gamut of what you're doing with Hark? Was there something else you'd like to tell us about that?
There's more.
Tell us more.
One of the things that we got interested in some years ago, right now we're sort of between phases, it's called NOAH, Neighborhood Older Adult Histories. And what we do is we find interesting folks that are like 85 or above in age, and we go and interview them. And so we've got a number of DVDs that are interviews with interesting people. We hope to do a second round of that next year. The first round was back a couple of years ago, and we got some fascinating folks. One of the ones I wish you could have met, she's passed on now. Her name was Elma Roan, and she was from this church, but she was the longtime leader of the women's athletics at the University of Memphis. And she, in the interview, she tells about some of her early times finishing up at what was then West Tennessee Teachers College, and then it became, as you know, Memphis State. But she became a high school teacher. And during World War II, she was right down here at Messick, and so many of the coaches were among those going off in the armed services. And so Elma became the boys basketball coach. And the way she tells, he says, yes, one year I became the only woman coach ever to win the boys city championship. And then she went on to talk about her career. She was really one of the top 4 or 5 women in the whole country as pioneers for Title IX, which is the Equal for Women athletic programs of the universities and colleges. So that's one of the fascinating interviews. Another one was with a lady named Mary Davis, who is still living now. She lives at Treslet Manor right up here on Highland. And Mary was over 50 years at St. Mary's Episcopal School, and fascinating stories in her educational career. And so we want to have another round of that, and we are relying on service groups and congregations and friends to nominate folks for us who are 85 or older. And you know, it'd be a shame not to get their stories before they pass away, because there's so much great oral history. Really
good. We are familiar with and have done some work with Gary Witt, who was the former oral history department head at Lausanne School. And I think probably more than anybody in the country, the number of World War II veterans, because we're losing them very rapidly. And he's made so many of those, and then of course they go to Washington and go into the archives. They're very, very interesting. I was thinking at the time that watching what he was doing, I wondered if there was anybody doing that for, like you're talking about doing that, you know, just for people who here in the city.
And copies of our videos also go to the, what do they call it, the Mississippi River Historical society. I'm not remembering exactly the title, but it's located in the McCorkle Library on campus. And Mississippi River Valley Collection. And so they'll be part of that too. Right now we're putting Father Nick Viren on our list. Have you had him as an interview yet?
Not that I can.
Oh, there's another one. Now see, Nick is the retired priest of Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church. Over 50 years he served up there on kind of the north end of Highland near Summer. And of course they have that famous annual Greek bazaar that's so well attended and raises charity resources for them. But Nick is such a personality. He makes me seem slow. I mean, he is so quick, and he's way up in his 80s. We want to get his interview while he can still do a lot of good communicating. And that's the kind of thing that can really mean a lot to a community in the long term.
There's a little feeling of continuity, doesn't it?
Right.
Things going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how did you get involved in all this to start with? I mean, you started out as a minister in the United Methodist Church, right?
That's right.
Where did the community outreach start?
Well, I guess there were several threads of that. One time in my teen years, my dad got involved with Salvation Army, and he took him with me one afternoon. He was delivering some groceries and some clothing to a family, and he took me with him. And so I met the family, and I just experienced a little bit of what their situation was, what they faced, and it got me interested in the kind of things my dad was doing, following his example. Then when I was in seminary in Dallas, Texas, I met a fellow named John Tatum. He was the head of a group called the Dallas Inner City Parish, and they did all kinds of outreach programs. This was back in like 1968 to 71. And so I became interested in urban ministry. It's not that I didn't want to be in rural areas or small towns. I just felt a special kind of a call to work with the very difficult urban problems that we face in our country. And then the opportunity came to come to Memphis, and I had been profoundly affected by the assassination of Dr. King in '68. That was my senior year of college. And so in '71, when I finished, and when my wife finished her college career, and we got married in June of that year, this seemed like a natural fit. We were both from Mississippi, but a lot of influence and a lot of flow from Mississippi to Memphis. And so we came here, and my first assignment was with St. John's United Methodist Church, which probably now is most famous for Church Health Center, located there at Peabody and Bellevue. And in those days, there was still a tremendous mission field with especially Lamar Terrace Housing Project, which was just a mile from there. And so some of my early work was ball teams and after-school programs and such with some of those children and teenagers from Lamar Terrace, and a lot of memories coming from that. And so then it became just logical, I guess, to match me up with various churches, usually struggling churches in the older part of the city. And so that's kind of been my main experience.
But while you're actually pastoring a church, there's a lot of work involved there. It makes it outside activity a little tough, doesn't it?
Well, you have to kind of integrate the community outreach with the so-called regular stuff of the church. And with a little work and prayer and help and some good committees and teams and such, that's doable. For instance, St. Luke's has an exemplary hunger ministry, and it was already there when I arrived. It expanded a little bit during my 8 years, but they were already feeding about 75 folks every Saturday, and it goes back, about 20 years. Once that gets to be a part of the DNA of a church, it seems much more natural than just seeming like some strange thing that's beyond the usual church work. I guess another part of just my whole approach is that early on I discovered I just bore too easily.
Got to stay busy, hyperactive.
So I didn't want to just sit around and hear sermons and Sunday school lessons and do nothing. I guess it's in my blood to kind of be an activist, and so I've been very lucky that I've been places and been with people where that was at least tolerated.
Now you're supposedly in retirement, but you're back as a minister.
I usually say retread.
Pastoring, yeah.
People say retired, I say retread.
Retread.
Of course, June was when I retired from St. Luke's, and then I took a wonderful trip out west. I was able to go assist at a wedding in Oregon, And I made it kind of a trek, kind of a vision quest, and I went to several places. I saw 3 national parks, visited a lot of relatives and friends, and just had a great whirlwind trip, about 11 days. But only a few days after I got back from that, one of our pastors out in the Mason-Braden area, about 35 miles east of Memphis, suddenly died of a heart attack. And so the bishop called and said, "We need someone to fill in, will you please do it?" And I said yes. So now I'm kind of an unusual rural and urban combo guy. And I'm discovering that some of the same blessings and opportunities as well as problems are right there in the small rural area as they are in Memphis.
How big is Mason-Braden?
Braden is a community of about 300 at the conjunction of Highway 59 and Highway 70. And then Mason has 1,600 people and is just right near the line between Tipton and Fayette counties, south of Covington, Tennessee, which is the county seat. And then I discovered in Mason that
This is north of I-40.
north of I-40, just not very far, about 3 miles north. But I discovered when I Googled and did a little research about Mason that of the 1,600 population, 75% are males. Now, how do you figure that? I'll tell you. There is a state prison there, and 600 men live there, and they count those men in the population. And so it's a town with about 75% men, but with
Most of them
a
incarcerated.
third of the population incarcerated. So that's a mission field, and we're looking at ways that we can relate to that. A lot of poverty in Mason. Some of the churches have gotten together to try to do some things, and we had a festival recently, and I got up a quartet and we sang at that, and I wrote a little rap kind of song and presented that about hope in the community and some of the things we need to do. But a lot of poverty and joblessness and such there, but sort of a mini version of the massive problems we face in Memphis.
There's been some high-profile people get involved in, like Chuck Colson, Nixon fame,
Fellowship.
who got involved in prison ministry. Do you see those as being very effective?
I think there's potential with most anybody that has some genuine goodwill trying to help. One of the interesting things that has some theological base to it you may have heard of is called Kairos. And Kairos is a spin-off of the Catholic Cursillo movement and the Walk to Emmaus Protestant movement, which is a short course in Christianity that's offered in a weekend type setting. Kairos, the quote outsiders, the church people come in and they present this course to inmates. And some amazing and wonderful things have happened in that, particularly some things that have happened as that touched lives, and then after the person finished their term or got on probation and was out of jail, they were able to go on and have a better life. So yeah, that's very Wesleyan. I suppose I'm about as Wesleyan as there is around, because I think he found the key as far as the combination of faith and the social dimensions of that in the community and in the society in which he lived. The balance of those things.
I think our viewers would like to know, I mean, they know about Martin Luther and the 95 Thesis on the wall in Wittenberg and the Protestant Reformation, but could you give a little bit of a dissertation here on John Wesley and because you mentioned Wesleyan, and I'm sure a lot of people won't connect with that.
Yeah, you find more people named Wesley than really know about Wesley all that much. But my brother, his name is Jim Matheney, and he actually impersonates Wesley. He's been all over the country in full costume and everything. So I hope we can get him here to Memphis sometime. Maybe you can.
Did he have a distinct look
meet
or
him,
something?
Jim. Well, Jim makes himself look like him a good bit according to the portraits and the paintings and such. But anyway, Wesley came along in the 1700s in England, and the situation was dire. Of course, we're familiar with some of that by reading Charles Dickens, David Copperfield and things like that, A Christmas Carol. But Wesley was the son of an Anglican priest. The Anglican priest, his dad, Samuel, was a little bit of a nonconformist in that he didn't just strictly go by all the structure and the type theology of the Anglican church. But the church was captive at the time. The Anglican church was captive of the propertied people. They would control the church, and it remained small because there were a massive number of people that they just didn't want to come into the church. The poor, the unwashed, the uneducated, the non-property people. But Wesley realized that the gospel was for all the people, and so he broke outside the confines of the walls of the church, and at times preached outdoors, like at one point preached on his father's tombstone. And if you go there on tour now, you'll find where tourists have come for 200 years and stood where he stood preaching there. And so there's this recess at his dad's tombstone. But he would preach to 5,000, 10,000 people outdoors. And a lot of these folks, although they could barely understand him because he was quite scholarly, but they would listen to him and they would feel touched by the message. And there are many people who credit Wesley with helping England avoid a civil war, because he reached people who were beyond the church and who were debtors, coal miners, the so-called common people. And the Methodist movement was really built as the gospel flourished with these folks outside the walls of the Anglican Church. And then, of course, that came to America through missionaries like Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury. Asbury was the first person made a Methodist bishop in America, in Baltimore in 1784. And it spread rapidly in the frontier area especially. That's why there's, to this day, the majority of Methodist churches are in small communities around the country like Mason and Braden. And those number of congregations far outnumber our urban and town type churches. But it's, to me, an exciting, fascinating marriage of basic faith in Jesus Christ, but with the kind of implications that has for how we treat one another as a society. Or one of the other ways that I talk about it is there's the relationship that's vertical between self and God, but just as important and essential is the horizontal relationship between neighbor, as we're called upon to love our neighbors as ourselves. And of course, with those two things together, it makes a cross. But if you take only the vertical, then you're really talking about a selfish brand of religion. I had a friend some years ago, and it made me mad, and I told him, I was honest, but he said, I wrote a new song, I want you to hear my song. And so I went, and he played and sang his song, and it was, Me and My Jesus, We've Got a Good Thing Going. And the whole song was about him and Jesus. Never mentioned another person. Never mentioned the call to social action or responsibility or the issues that we must deal with in our society. And so I like the balance that a good Wesleyan has in terms of their basic piety or devotional Christianity and their care for love of neighbor.
In the inner city, there's been a lot of closures of Methodist churches. Or either they've either sold them. You've got one on Cooper and like this that was sold to a more charismatic Me and My Jesus type of program. And what's the answer to that? I mean, programs like you have with Hark, you think that might be something that would revitalize these churches in the inner city?
I think that's part of it, yes. Yes, a lot of the decline of Methodist churches in the city has been the same with other denominations as well, with what we might as well just be honest and say is white flight. The pattern in Memphis has been white flight from the inner city to the suburbs.
You have that huge Church of Christ that's right here on Highland.
They're still called Highland Church of Christ,
right,
but they're on Houston Levee.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that was a big piece of property there.
But there's a lot of white flight. Now, a lot of folks in the suburbs like to do selected mission projects and things, but it's sort of like a hit and run thing. But we need to build up communities where there's a diverse, faithful community, and they're right there in the neighborhood. Like you mentioned around Binghamton, it's not large. Church there is small in membership, but the sense of community there, especially with that Caritas Village project with Only John's, is very strong.
Yeah.
So I think that, one of our bishops not too long ago said, I want to ask the churches this one question. If you suddenly close down, would the neighborhood miss you? And it need to be about the fact of helping the neighborhood so that, yeah, they really would miss us, but rather let's stick with it and let's work together enough to where we can continue to be in neighborhoods and be strong.
Would you like to answer a few questions? Do we have any questions? People shaking their heads. I think you've done such a good job that there's no questions.
Well,
does that happen in your church?
Well, no, but I enjoy, by the way, situations in teaching and in preaching where you do have interaction. One of my favorite things with my rural churches that they had not done for a while is have the children come forward and have a part of the sermon would be the children's section. And of course, some of the things they come up with are better than, once or twice we'll have that part and then I'll say, let's have the benediction and skip the adult part because the children are so good sometimes with their insights and such.
What do you see happening now? Do you think you'll be moving more into fully working with Hark and the outreach, or do you think you'll continue to be active in the ministry?
Yes.
Both?
Balance on that probably is, and you know, a lot of people say once a minister, always a minister. I guess it's, once it gets in your blood, then it's incurable.
Don't know how that.
But what you have to do is you have to be sensitive and be aware and realize that we all have space and places we should be. And when the time came for me to finish 8 years at St. Luke's and to retire, and to have some more time for family, like with some grandchildren that we're now enjoying and about to enjoy, you turn it over to someone else. You pass the baton. But there's still things that you can do to be helpful, especially if you don't try to run things or to look over people's shoulder, but just find your niche and just help as much as you can. And of course, I've always felt too that it is not impossible to do something that is difficult and serious, but at the same time to be joyful, or to have a good time doing something that might be a really tremendous challenge. I mean, like, say housing, you know, Habitat, it's hard work to build a house. And I learned a lot. I was ignorant when I first started, but I learned a lot about roofing and the various details of that. But it was fun. It was fun because of connecting with the family that would move into the house. They would come and work with the volunteers and the dedication service. I can't tell you how fun it was. Years ago, this is now 30 years ago, just last month, we had the dedication of the first Habitat house in Memphis. It's still there, and the owner, same person, is still there. She paid off her mortgage 10 years ago. Her name is Savannah Simmons. It's over behind St. Mary's Cathedral near downtown. And Rosalind Carter came and helped dedicate. So we had this ceremony, and there's nothing quite as heartwarming as those kinds of things happening.
I wonder, we've got a few minutes left. If you would like, I mean, most ministers, this is kind of a silly question. Do you have anything you'd like to say? But would you like to you give a message or have a message for our viewers about?
Have we talked about music yet?
No.
I hear a train a-coming.
Yeah.
It's coming around the bend. But we're not in Folsom Prison right now.
No.
Well, you mentioned earlier about a doctoral project. I don't always talk about that, and I hope this doesn't come across like, oh, well, he's going to brag about his doctoral degree. But I would like to talk about that a little bit because it has been applicable in what I've done over the years. This was finished in 1986, and it's an emphasis on black music. It's an emphasis on the spirituals, the gospels. Really, they started in the fields where the slaves were toiling back in the 1820s and 30s, and they began to sing. And so then theology began to come into play. And so the dissertation is about the themes of freedom and hope in the music of the spirituals and gospels and blues, etc. And for the title, I used part of a poem by the famous poetess Maya Angelou. And the phrase from the poem is, "I know why the caged bird sings. The caged bird sings of freedom." So I studied freedom and hope primarily from the standpoint of two theologians. One is James Cone and the other Jürgen Moltmann. And I discovered that those songs, dating all the way back to the field songs and the early spirituals, so often, just very, very often, spoke of freedom and hope. And so, for instance, one of the most familiar, I guess, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, well, it was not only a plea for deliverance and a looking for that time to go to heaven and no longer be burdened in oppression, it was also a code song for the Underground Railroad. The sweet chariot to carry one home would not just be to heaven, but also to go to freedom. And so I discovered that a whole bunch of the heritage of music in America, particularly from the African American perspective, has to do with themes like hope and freedom. And so I've been able to kind of adapt some of that, not always just with singing, but some of those lessons that I learned in that process way back in the 80s have been applied as I've gone through. And so I've been with a number of different kind of singing groups over the years. Usually, whatever church I would be, I would sing maybe at least with the specials at Easter and Christmas. Once in a while break into a song during a sermon. But then back in the 80s when we'd had a fire that destroyed the old United Methodist Neighborhood Center headquarters, I started a group called The Bridge, and a fellow named Noah Bond and I had met at the dedication of the Habitat for Humanity house, and we started singing gospel songs together. And pretty soon we had 8 men, singers, 4 white and 4 black. And we had a run of about 8-10 years there and had a lot of fun with that.
You still have a group?
And now there's a different group. We have a group called the Braden Brothers, and we founded it at the Braden Church for that Unity Festival that I told you about. And I still sing with two or three other kinds of groups at different times. So people have kind of come to, if not expect, at least to be on guard for, I might be right in the middle of a talk or something, and I might just break right into a song. For instance, one time I wrote one that was called, "Let love grow, bear fruit on the vine. Let love grow, O God, we are thine. Jesus the vine, and we are the branches. Let love grow, let love grow." And that's based on the passage in John about I am the vine and you are the branches.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish the interview here
That
on
killed
Core
it, huh?
Concepts. And I want to thank you very much for being with us. And,
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.
I want to thank all of you for watching us on Core Concepts. And we will have a whole new series beginning in January. You'll not be getting new ones here this month. Enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you next year.